the last 2 decades, Pixar Animation Studios have been entertaining and inspiring us with some of the most wonderful animated movies ever made. With inspirational stories, lovable characters, and spectacular animation. Movies that we've all grown up with and have shaped our very beings and given us lifelong friends we'll never forget. They're the studio that, almost unlike no other, has allowed us the ability to connect with not only humans, but animals, monsters, automobiles, robots, toys, and other inanimate objects, by infusing them with undying human spirit and the qualities that make us all who we are. Pixar Animation not only pioneered computer animation in the mid-1980s, but delivered us the first ever full-length computer animated movie in 1995. Now, with 15 Academy Awards, 9 Golden Globes, and 11 Grammys under their belt, Pixar have released their 20th feature film. As a celebration, in this video I aim to rank all 20 Pixar animated movies from least favourite to favourite, including the newly released Incredibles 2. From the outset, please let me stress that this is a list of my own personal favourites, and not a technical list of Pixar's movies from best to worst. But that's my favourite part about movies like these. Everyone has their own personal favourites, their own personal connections, and their own personal nostalgia. And that's what these movies are all about. So yes, my decisions are partly based on nostalgia, they are partly based on enjoyment, but they're also partly based on my respect for the material. So with that, let's get into it. Here is my personal ranking of Pixar animation movies. Kicking us off at number 20, Cars 2. It saddens me to have to put any entry of the Cars franchise right down the bottom, but to me, Cars 2 represents the lowest point of Pixar animation. This was the point where Pixar went from the studio that put time and care and effort into all their movies and would only make a sequel if it was needed, to the studio that wasn't afraid to ride on the back of the money train. Unfortunately, Cars 2 was nothing but a cash grab following the highly successful Cars, which made a ton of money for Pixar in merchandising. Sadly, the picture ended up rushed, with little of the love and care that all Pixar movies had been subject to previously. As a result, the movie lacked the heart, soul, and humanity of the first Cars installment, in favour of being a movie about nothing more than fast cars and explosions. This was a bad move for Pixar, one that they'd learned big lessons from, but one which unfortunately came at an enormous cost. It was the movie which began the downward spiral of less than spectacular Pixar offerings which came over the following years. 19. Ratatouille. Okay, I'm not saying Ratatouille is a bad movie, it's certainly far from it, but this is one that I just could never get into. Perhaps to me, the most overrated Pixar movie of the bunch. It's one that never really reached classic status for me, and while it does have more heart and soul than Cars 2, this one always just felt like a funny animals do normal human things kind of movie to me. And I feel like Pixar is more than that. It does have some funny, charming moments, but yeah, Ratatouille just isn't for me. 18. The Good Dinosaur. Now, I don't hate The Good Dinosaur like some did, I actually really enjoyed it, but it really is hard to overlook the fact that this was Pixar's first major flop, which came out of a period of uncertainty and brand reshuffling following the backlash from Cars 2 and to a lesser extent, Monsters University. The problem with Good Dinosaur is that it was somewhat of Pixar's B movie next to Inside Out, which was released in the same year, as a rushed effort in order to provide audiences with fresh, original Pixar content instead of sequels and prequels, and it really showed. Sadly, The Good Dinosaur was tarnished by this. The end product is one which has all the right feels and beats of a great Pixar movie, but simplified storytelling and animation, as well as perhaps the youngest demographic of all of Pixar's movies, meant that this just didn't feel like a Pixar movie. More like something to come out of DreamWorks or Illumination Entertainment. 17. Finding Dory. I'm unsure Finding Nemo ever really needed a sequel in the first place, but I really loved and enjoyed Finding Dory. It's a fun, entertaining and touching ride and a worthwhile entry in Pixar's canon with exceptional animation. However, we can't deny that this movie is far and away from the original. I sadly felt that Dory lacked the character depth, complexity and intricate storytelling of Nemo, and instead once again took an easier, more simplistic route with some silly jokes and some supporting characters you never really care for. Dory feels more like its own thing than a straight sequel, perhaps more of a spin-off, and maybe because of that I'm just kind of judging it unfairly, but regardless, it's quite clear that Dory is no Nemo. 16. Monsters University. Monsters University could quite possibly be the most lackluster Pixar movie of them all. Sure, Cars 2 was an enormous letdown, but the follow-up to Monsters Inc., which had opened when I was only 10 years old, left a little bit of a bitter taste. Monsters University is a highly enjoyable movie and offers some very funny, even laugh-out-loud moments, and even retains some of the charm of the original, though much like Dory, it just lacks that depth. Again, this is not a bad movie, it just never lived up to the expectations I'd had for a Monsters Inc. follow-up for 12 years of my life. I really would have much rathered a straight sequel than When Mikey Met Sully, and hopefully someday we will get that. I do, however, applaud Pixar's bravery when it came to making a college comedy while managing to keep it G-rated, but in the end, as far as prequels go, of which this was Pixar's first and so far only attempt, it fares pretty well. 15. Inside Out. Whoa! Inside Out so low? What is wrong with you, man? I know, everyone loves Inside Out, but me personally, I just don't know. It just never really clicked with me. This is a great story and a whole lot of incredibly emotional moments, but Inside Out just kind of fell short for me. The best thing this movie has going for it is its wonderful animation and memorable characters, but again, this is one that just never screamed Pixar to me, just kind of generic animated movie. Look, I will admit that the premise of Inside Out is fantastic, but I kind of feel like while it was executed quite well, it just didn't quite reach as far as it could have, or as far as I wanted it to. Overall, it is a really good movie, and one that I found myself enjoying more on repeat viewings, but again, it's just not a classic for me. 14. Brave. Whoa! Brave above Inside Out! What's wrong with you, man? I know. Brave cops a pretty bad rap for one reason or another. No, it's not the best Pixar movie, but I actually think it's really great. And personally, I think that this has one of the best art designs of any Pixar movie so far, with gorgeous animation and wonderful colorscapes. I also think that this one feels like the most Disney of all the Pixar movies. You have a princess, a witch, a faraway land, and of course, magic. It's a recipe for a wonderful and original Disney fantasy, and to me it succeeds on all levels, but maybe this is why it failed so hard for so many. I think with Brave, Pixar learnt that princess and fairy tale fare should be left to the Disney animation division. That's not something that I necessarily agree with, but from a marketing standpoint, perhaps it's best for Pixar to leave it to the pros. Does it match up to Disney's fairy tale movies like, say, Beauty and the Beast or even Tangled? Certainly not, but at least they gave it a crack, and I'm happy for it. 13. Incredibles 2. Perhaps the most surprising Pixar movie of the bunch for me, especially considering Pixar's track record of sequels and prequels. Incredibles 2 completely exceeded all my expectations, especially considering the first movie never really held up as a classic for me, despite having quite a big love for it. Incredibles 2 does everything a sequel should do. It furthers the story of our characters, retains all the heart, soul, and depth of the previous installment, and moves in new and unexpected directions. I'm glad Pixar learned their errors from Cars 2 and made sure to keep this a movie about family over all else, and didn't just decide to make a generic, overblown superhero flick. While not the best Pixar movie of the bunch, it is a perfect sequel, and one which matches up to the quality and enjoyability of the first. However, coming in at number 12 is The Incredibles. While Incredibles 2 absolutely entirely lives up to the first, one can't overlook the pure originality and ingenuity that was the original picture. It was not just a groundbreaking animation, but a groundbreaking superhero movie too. One which put more focus on family dynamics and real human stories over superheroics and action sequences. Incredibles is somewhat of a spoof of the superhero genre on the exterior, but underneath it all is a movie that fits into the genre so beautifully and organically that it's quite clear that future superhero movies like those from Marvel's Cinematic Universe certainly took cues and inspiration from it, in the way that they juggle heart and humor alongside comic book action. While this one also never really held up for me as a classic, rewatching it recently has given me a new appreciation for it. With great animation for its time, perfect writing and direction, and gorgeous 1960s modern design, Incredibles is, well, incredible. Sorry, not sorry. 11. WALL-E. Quite easily one of the most gorgeous, touching, and inspiring animations ever made. WALL-E is such a terrific picture that came at the peak of Pixar's animation domination. A movie which looks back to our past and looks forward to our future and makes us take a good, hard look at our present. WALL-E is a statement on the state of humanity and our planet, wrapped in the disguise of a delightful fable for all ages. Part sci-fi, part fantasy, yet also part reality. Pixar continued to show that they could bring humanity to just about anything just through animation. In fact, the beauty of WALL-E rests in its characters. Within the movie we see that Pixar's most human character is actually a machine. One who barely speaks, but who we can relate to, sympathize with, and feel love for, just from his most simple of actions. And also, it's funny to note that this love story between two robots is their most touching and poignant love story yet. WALL-E was an incredibly brave move for Pixar, but one which paid off immensely. 10. Finding Nemo. Like The Incredibles, Finding Nemo took a rewatch for me to appreciate its brilliance. It's one which I never really loved after first viewing, but one which I completely and utterly fell in love with when I viewed it a decade later with more mature eyes. Nemo's touching story of the love between a father and his son is so incredibly special. It's that perfect Pixar story which brings together audiences of all ages who connect and bond on personal levels. Unlike Dory, Nemo is actually filled with supporting characters you can totally fall in love with too. Nemo's groundbreaking animation is so beautiful, so real that you just want to dive right in. It's some of the most amazing, most succulent animation ever. And if you ever get a chance to watch this one in 3D, I implore you to. It's the best 3D movie I've ever watched. 9. Coco. Coco is one of the most delightful, inspiring, and uplifting movies I think I've ever seen. It's a wonderful tale about following your dreams at all costs and against all odds, and about celebrating and embracing your culture and what makes you so unashamedly you. Quite easily one of Pixar's most stunning, extravagant, and eccentric movies with the most dazzling animation ever seen. The colors, the designs, and the characters simply leap off the screen and create one of the most immersive, intimate experiences imaginable. Coco once again does the thing that Pixar does best. It blends the line between fantasy and reality to the point where you're unsure which is which. It's a beautiful celebration of Mexican culture with a magnificent soundtrack to boot. It's entertaining, emotional, and entirely rewarding, and it's one that I'll be going back to many, many times. 8. Up. The first 5 minutes of Up are perhaps the most heart-wrenching, tear-inducing minutes ever put into animation. The great Walt Disney always said that his job would be done if he could make his audience cry over cartoon characters, and he'd be surely proud of Pixar's efforts with Up. Easily one of the most emotional yet heartwarming movies Pixar ever pumped out. With fun adventure, relatable characters, and all of that classic Pixar heart and soul I keep going on about. It's a story about humankind at their most vulnerable, rising above out of the shadows of their past. A delightful, relatable story with a heart-pumping, energetic score that makes you want to get off your behind and out into your own great big adventures. And in fact, I might just do that right now. Okay, sorry guys, I'll finish the video first. 7. Cars 3. After Cars 2, I'd all but lost hope for the Cars franchise. But the most wonderful thing with Pixar is that they actually listen to their audience, take on board criticism, and proactively address the errors of their ways. With a 6-year gap distancing it from Cars 2, Cars 3 proved that once and for all, Pixar were definitely back on track after Inside Out gave audiences hope for a better future. Not only is Cars 3 a great movie, but it's a spectacular sequel, one which somewhat even ignores that the events of the second one even happened. Where Cars 2 lacked the heart, soul, and originality of the first, Cars 3 brings it all back with a vengeance. There's no doubt that this is easily one of Pixar's greatest sequels and one of their greatest movies, full stop. One which totally faces off against the original and follows it right through to the finish line to become a movie as enjoyable, entertaining, and emotionally touching and satisfying. Cars 3 is as perfect as it ever could have been. However, once again, just as Incredibles 2 showed us, it's always hard to top the original. At number 6 is, of course, Cars. With the original Cars, Pixar once again infused life into inanimate objects and sent us on an exciting, emotional ride with them. Never did I think I'd ever have any kind of emotional connection to an automobile like the connection I had with Lightning McQueen, one of Pixar's most endearing characters. Lightning McQueen has easily one of the most beautiful character arcs of any Pixar character to date. From self-entitled jerk to humble hero, all the while selflessly changing the lives of those around him, including that of the clumsy yet affable Mater, another Pixar highlight. Cars was a property that sold upwards of $10 billion in merchandise from the first movie alone. But as the second movie proved, this is a story that's more than just about flashy cars and fast races. It's easily one of the most touching stories ever to be put on film. A deep, meaningful story about being the best you that you can be, and that what's on the inside is what truly counts. 5. A Bug's Life. In more recent times, I feel that A Bug's Life hasn't quite retained the classic status that it deserves. No, compared to what we have these days, the animation may not be spectacular, the story may not be what some call original, and the characters may not be the most memorable, but I think that this is one of those you had to be there kind of movies. A Bug's Life came out only 3 years after Toy Story as Pixar's second ever movie, and it was truly a revelation. We must remember that this was the beginning of this wonderful art form, and regardless of how primitive it seems now, at the time, there had been nothing like it. I have a great deal of nostalgia for this movie. I was only 7 years old when it was first released, and it was one that I had a great attachment to throughout my childhood. I will agree in the whole scheme of things, there are a lot of better Pixar movies, but if nothing else, this one stood as a testament to all that could and would be achieved through the art of CG animation. I'll always have a place for A Bug's Life in my heart, if not for the pure nostalgia alone, and the memories of that wonder, that excitement of being there at the start of this technical revolution. 4. Toy Story 2. When Pixar do sequels right, they really do them right. Toy Story 2 hit all the right beats of a great sequel. It brought back all our beloved characters and furthered their stories and narratives, upping their stakes and doubling the emotion and heart. The movie also introduced us to new heroes like Jessie and Bullseye, who would go on to be just as iconic and lovable as those from the first, and frightening new antagonists like Zurg and Stinky Pete, who could easily rank with some of Disney's more iconic villains. Instead of giving us a rehash of movie number 1, Pixar took the time and effort to meticulously craft a sequel which runs in new directions and takes our characters to unpredictable places, giving us a fresh new adventure, perhaps even more enjoyable, gripping, funny, and lovable than that of the first. Really, Toy Story 2 did things no animated sequel had ever done before, and at that it did things that most film sequels struggle to do still. After 3 successful movies prior, focusing not only on the advancement of groundbreaking animation, but also on impeccable storytelling, in the space of 4 years, Pixar had shown that they were masters of storytelling and the kings of the CG animation art form, and nothing could stop them. At least for a few years anyway. 3. Monsters, Inc. Yet another classic Pixar offering from their earliest days. Perhaps an era which will become known as the golden age of Pixar. Monsters, Inc. continued Pixar's success following both Toy Story and A Bug's Life, and provided us with more iconic characters, emotional, multi-layered storytelling, and wonderful humor. Pixar continued to push the limits of storytelling and animation with a premise so original and unlike anything ever seen before. By this point, Pixar's animation had become so refined that the performances of the vocal artists were seamlessly infused into the characters. When we watch Mike and Sully, we can see Billy Crystal and John Goodman inside them. They not only provided incredible vocal performances, but gave these characters real life. Yes, that is something that's taken for granted now, but it was something that was very hard to accomplish in animation previously, and was an incredible revelation back in 2001. This movie has so much warmth, and so much depth, and so many beautiful, hilarious, and frightening moments, making it incredibly gripping from beginning to end, to audiences of all ages. So much so that it will be incredibly hard to overlook this as one of the most wonderful animated movies of all time. 2. Toy Story 3. Toy Story 3 is easily the most emotional Pixar movie ever made. It's hilarious and heartwarming, yet equally heart-wrenching and tear-inducing. But that's for reasons beyond it just being a great story and, let's face it, a perfect movie. When the first Toy Story was released, I was only 4 years old, roughly the same age as Andy in the movie. By the time the third one came around, I had turned 18 years old and begun my first year of university, again, much like Andy had in the movie itself. Toy Story 3 isn't just a wonderful, entertaining movie, but for me, and those of my generation, this was part of a spiritual journey. For me, Toy Story 3 almost felt like a rite of passage. It was a movie for those of us who had grown up with these characters and these stories, and with it, Pixar showed us that these characters and stories had grown with us too. The movie acted as a swan song for this beautiful trilogy, and closed out Andy's 3-movie arc, and in turn worked as almost the closing of a personal life arc for those who grew with the trilogy. The movie told us it's okay to grow up. It's okay to let go, and it's time to hand this franchise to the next generation, because these characters and these stories will always be with you no matter what. This movie not only did this, but introduced Toy Story to a new generation. And while I feel this movie has grown as a classic with them, those of us who actually grew with these characters for, by this point, the best part of 2 decades, really did get the most out of this story. We laughed with them, we cried with them, felt their every emotion because we had cared so deeply for them for so long. Pixar's decision to keep this movie in real time was absolutely perfect, as opposed to, say, The Incredibles 2, which takes place within minutes of the closing of the first one, which came out 14 years prior. Because this way it worked so much more narratively and emotionally. I can't say that I'm annoyed that Pixar are making a 4th installment, as some are, regardless of how perfect an ending this movie gave the story, because just as this movie taught us, life comes in phases, and every ending has a new beginning. Our Toy Story may be over, but it's time for the next generation to have theirs. I really cannot wait for a new generation of adventures, for a new generation of kids to fall in love with these stories and characters just as I did almost 25 years ago. And coming in as my #1 favourite Pixar movie of all time, it is of course the incomparable Toy Story. So quite clearly I have an enormous emotional connection to the original Toy Story. I grew with it and I learned with it. From Toy Story, I learned everything I ever needed to know about life, love, friendship, family, and togetherness. I spent my young childhood watching this movie continuously, and also playing with the screen-accurate dolls and action figures. Buzz and Woody weren't just characters to me, they were friends, and they were family. They jumped from the screen into my life, and into my childhood imaginations. Not only this, but even at a very, very young age, it was clear to me how special this movie was. After The Lion King, Toy Story was the second movie I ever saw in cinemas, and I still vividly remember the experience of seeing it at only 4 years old. The images, the colours, the characters, the animation, it all felt so real, even though I knew it wasn't. Toy Story was the very first feature-length computer animated movie in history. And just like Snow White is to traditional animation, Toy Story remains the pinnacle and benchmark that all other computer animations are judged against. Toy Story not only delivered an hour and a half of groundbreaking animation, but it had the story, the heart, and the obvious honesty, love, and care to back it up. Going back to Walt Disney's rules for animation, the animators at Pixar knew that the audience wouldn't embrace a new art form if it didn't have a soul, and the ability to transcend the unreality, the ability to allow the suspension of belief. Toy Story was an absolutely transformative experience, and I can only imagine that seeing this movie was like experiencing Snow White in 1937 or even Star Wars in 1977. Toy Story is not only my favourite animated movie of all time, but it's one of my favourite movies, full stop. This movie does things that the best live action movies cannot, and to think that one can form such a strong connection with a bunch of toys. But isn't that just the beauty of Pixar? With an incredible cast of characters, friends, an unforgettable soundtrack by the master Randy Newman, whose soundtrack shaped an iconic Pixar sound, an adventure you just want to jump straight into, and the warmth of a friendly hug. Toy Story goes out as my #1 favourite Pixar animation movie of all time. And at that, we come to the end of my personal ranking of all 20 Pixar animation movies. Agree with what I had to say? Disagree with all of it? Let me know your personal thoughts and rankings down below. If this is your first time viewing my channel, you've enjoyed this video and you'd like to see more like it in the future, then please hit that big old subscribe button up on your screen right now and hit that like button down below. Also, don't forget to check out my many social media accounts and please consider supporting me over on Patreon. Until next time guys, take care and I hope you have a wonderful day to infinity and beyond.